Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you. Only just a few minor little things in that. I've never been called Thomas by anybody. My mother won't even call me Thomas, but the president can get away with this kind of stuff. He's got Tomas on my name tag down, name card down. So before we have a raging controversy, my name is Tom Ivester, and I'm an alcoholic. Great to see you. I got a delayed reaction from somebody. That's well, we got to start counting cadence. We've got this guy on time here. I'm a member of the Primary Purpose A group in Southern Pines, North Carolina, and I'm the only guy who gets any of that right, though, Armando. I'm delighted to be here. You guys have done a great job putting the conference together. It reminds me of the international. Every time I go to an international, I'm just eaten up with conflict because there's so many things I want to go to that I can't get to. And I didn't think I'd run into that in San Bernardino, but by golly, I did. I was sitting in one meeting and my heart's in another one, and but great work. You know how to keep drunks distracted, that's for sure. I know everything in California is a little bit larger than life. I heard of campfire meetings, but I swear to God, y'all overdid it. My sobriety date is Groundhog Day of 57, and tell you, thank you very much. If I'd have known it was going to last this long, I'd have quit. I really didn't have any intention of staying sober this long. Didn't have any intention of getting this good either. I swear to God, I'm so good it's disgusting. I bore myself, you know. If you don't want to get too pure and you're new here, you better get out while you can. I tell you, at a certain point, it just sort of clamps in and you're just there for life. I hope. Well, I am delighted to be here. What I want to do, I think, I never am sure what to call this. Not really talks or visits or speeches, that's for sure. I think what I want to do is just sort of tell you what brings me to San Bernardino. You know, other than the invitation, that's one thing. It wouldn't have come without that. But it takes a certain kind of history, so I want to tell you a little bit about that. I'll tell you as much as I can. And I tell it all to you, but we got to be ready to leave. Do you have a question back there, sir? Oh, okay. He was waving his hand. I thought somebody needed to go to the bathroom or something. Well, all right, get ready. I'm going to work. I'm an average slice of life. I don't know exactly why I'm alcoholic. I just simply know that I am. And I'm a guy that I think grossly oversimplifies it, but I think we basically fall out into two categories or types of alcoholics, and that is a gross oversimplification, but it looks to me like we're two basic varieties. One is the type who starts drinking and seems to drink with relative control for a good while, and then something happens, the filter breaks or something, and you just sort of go off the deep end, never to be seen again, unless this program comes along and they surface. That's a real alcoholic. There's absolutely no question in my mind. There's another type who's a basket case from day one. And there is no real preparation. It just happens, man. I mean, it just sort of hit the ground flopping and stays that way. And I think I was one of the early models of that variety. I came along before that type had even been invented real well. And so that's what I was. I was a guy that boozed. Now, I'm somebody, I'm not the village idiot, but I can compete for it. I'm certainly no rocket scientist, that's for sure. But I like to keep things remarkably simple, and it's partly by necessity. But the thing when I think about my alcoholism, I know that I didn't buy it from a bootlegger or from a liquor store or a bar. That certainly was not the case. And I'm not somebody who gets overly Freudian or all that thing, but I'm not limited enough to just think that my early environmental influences had no real bearing. There was something that set me up to be a ready-made candidate for problems with alcohol. And I'm not going into a whole bunch of causation tonight, but I don't dismiss it. Certainly the environmental experience that I had, just like you had its influence on me. And some of it was good, a great deal of it was bad. And I was somebody who got scarred up a little in the formative years, so that I had experiences that really came across kind of like wounds or impacts on my shaping of character and personality. And they made life very uncomfortable for me, even as a child. And early on, I started to adapt some mannerisms, some patterns of behavior, some coping devices to help me get through life. Very simply in AA, we call those defects of character. Old saying that we're just like other people, only more so. I don't think I have any defect of character that any other human doesn't have. I just tended to go to extremes with it. Like, I'm a liar. I'm an absolutely inveterate liar. And I don't lie much anymore, because when I got real good, I even almost quit doing that. But I never have quit having the instinct to lie. Because like anybody will tell one at times, I was somebody who did one by nature. I mean, I didn't have to make up a lie. That's just instinct with me. I don't think I've ever instinctively blurted out the truth in my life. I have to be very deliberate when I do that. I honestly believe if somebody came into my home and awakened me at 3 o'clock in the morning and said, "What are you doing here?" I would jump up lying. I wouldn't have to think it over. I would automatically start lying to explain why I'm in my own home. Well, that's a defect of character. That's not just a bad habit. That's something that gets to be an instinctive way of doing. And so early on, I started to develop those things. They served me fairly well, but that's a kind of a troubling way to live. And so I say all of that just simply to say that when booze came along, I'm like most people I've heard. Most people don't put that kind of explanation on it, but I'm somebody who was ready-made. So when I took a drink, something happened to me that tended to be far more important than it was to the average walking around cat. Because that stuff did something for me. It made me feel good. It made a very uncomfortable life darn near enjoyable. I would have been stupid to not drink. Man, that stuff really did something to me. It beat psychiatry, that's for sure. And did a great job of turning me loose. And so I just started drinking. Man, it would have been foolish not to. And I just took to it with a passion. Nobody had to teach me. It was just as natural as breathing. And the logic was that I loved it so much I wanted to take it up as a way of life. I didn't think about it. I just did it. And tell you, I loved it. I loved everything about the lifestyle. I loved the stuff we drank, the people that drank it with me. I loved the places they did it. All of that stuff, it was just as natural to me as anything could be. And I loved that stuff. Any kind. Anything from sawdust on the floor, square dances in North Carolina, to jazz clubs in Chicago. I particularly like jazz clubs in Chicago. Loved that stuff. And I'll tell you something, no matter how trashy that might have looked, had I been able to continue drinking, even with the fallout that came out of that, I would be doing that tonight. I'll hurry up and assure you, even though I had a nice dinner with Brian, I'll just tell you now, when it comes to that, I'd be borderline infidel, I guess, because I would still be doing that if I could. I'm not here on moral grounds. I'm not here because I wised up and said sober is better than drunk. I think I'll try this, or this is a nice way to live, and it's a good cause. Baloney. That doesn't even make the chart. I'm here for one reason. Something happened to me in the midst of the endless party that I didn't know happened, but I know today that it happened. I didn't recognize it till I was sober and saw it in hindsight. Hindsight's very clear. I was busy when I crossed the line from kind of wild party drinking into alcoholism. I was busy and just didn't notice it. I was preoccupied with stuff. But when I got sober and looked back, I could see that something happened to me that I don't fully understand to this day. Now, I don't want you to think you got a total dummy for you unless you just figure it out for yourself. I don't want to confess it, but I swear to God, I believe I know less about alcoholism than I did the first year I was sober. I've been to, God knows how many tedious lectures about it, read books that made very little sense, saw films and videos and stuff. I've had it explained to me ad nauseum. But I know less about it now than I did in my first year of sobriety, I believe. And what I mean by that is that I don't understand what happened to me when I crossed that line. I'm not even sure what that reference means. It's just a popular saying we have that those of us who develop alcoholism come to a place and it's as if the curtain drops on Act 1 and opens on Act 2. And that's sort of the way that happened with me. I was drinking as much as I could before I was alcoholic. But something happened to me that doesn't happen to most people. My understanding is if 10 people take a drink, 9 of them will go about their business. They'll drink if they want to, or don't drink if they don't want to. If they drink, they won't drink much. And my observation has been that they won't do it very well. They just tend to be very poor drinkers as a class. And my wife's one of them. I married that little old girl. She was from the prairies up in Canada, and I was hungry for a woman. And so I got trapped up there. But oh, shoot, I'll just tell you this. I've been trying to teach her to drink for 38 years. And she still sucks as a drinker. I mean, she cannot drink. It's just dumb. We go to nice places once in a while when I'm trying to get out of the doghouse, and I'll take her to some spiffy restaurant where they serve wine with the meal. I mean, you don't have to order it, just serve it. And so they'll always come, would you like wine? And she'll always say, well, I'm not sure. And I'll say, yeah, we want wine. Of course we want wine. And so they'll bring the wine. I'm not going to pass up free booze. I don't care if I'm sober 100 years. I'm not going to pass it up. I'm not going to drink it, but I ain't going to let it go to waste, though. I guarantee you that. And so I'll say, bring it on. And she'll sit there and agonize over that stupid little glass of wine like it was heavy water or something for a bomb. And I can't get my mind off of it. The whole time to myself I'm saying, drink it, you nincompoop. Just sacrilegious to do that wine. Well, anyway, that always baffles me. I'm on airplanes all the time, and it to this day amazes me when once in a while, they don't do it much anymore, but they used to a lot of times they'd offer free booze, remember? I'd always take it. Then I'd go home, tell the wife I bought it for her on Rodeo Drive or somewhere, and some other lie. And people sitting there turn it down. I've actually asked them, why didn't you take the wine? And they say, I don't drink. So what's that got to do with it? Well, anyway, I don't understand those kind of people. I really don't. That's where the research needs to be done, is on them, not on us. I understand us. But anyway, that I don't know what that's about. You know, that 9 people that just go on and screw up their lives with that kind of stuff. One of us will stay. And why that is, I don't know. I don't understand a lot about the Doberman pinchers of the mind or whatever that is that gets out of whack up there. I don't understand craving. I guarantee you I know what it feels like. But I can't explain it. I do not understand craving. I don't even understand obsession. I have lived with obsession in the early years of my sobriety. So I understand obsession from the consumer standpoint because I know what it is. But why my mind operates like that, I haven't a clue. Well, I could talk all night about that, but the long and short of it is that something happened to me that doesn't happen to the overwhelming majority of folk when it comes to booze. If I take a drink of anything with alcohol in it, I cannot predict what I will do. I can't predict how much I'll drink, how long I'll drink, nor even what I'll do when I drink. I don't understand that. I don't need to understand it. I'll tell you the most important thing that I know about alcoholism is that I have it, to the exclusion of everything else combined. The knowledge that I have it is what I need to know in terms of my recovery. And so that's what happened. You know, I went to that place, I crossed that line, I hadn't a clue. You know, alcoholics don't drink, they don't look any different than anybody else when they drink. But something started to happen to me so subtle, it didn't look subtle, I'm sure, but so subtle that I didn't notice it. But what happened was that the pattern, not the amount of my drinking, but the pattern of my drinking changed. I started to be unable to predict. I'd stop by to have a couple drinks with the guys and close the joint. Wind up in a bootleg joint, in jail, psych wards, and wrecked cars, and not have a clue what had happened. Woke up one time married to a lady that I didn't even know. I mean, didn't know her. I didn't know her name. She had a god-awful name. That would have turned me off. She didn't know what she had either when she didn't stay long. But that's bad whiskey, buddy, when you start doing that. And so that started to be the stuff of my life, just that absolutely unpredictable thing that would happen. And so I just sort of took off. And you know, I was the type of guy, I'm really oversimplifying everything in a way, but I was the type of guy whose life was characterized by either looking like a world beater. You know, I was a guy who, when I was sober, brief intervals, but when I was sober, I very quickly looked real good. I was the type of fellow that made a good impression on people. I was the type of fellow that was almost routinely overrated by about anybody that saw me. I'd go look for a job. People would hire me for better jobs than I was looking for. And then I would work my way down. Because I had an even more unfailing tendency to take a drink at exactly the wrong time. And no matter how good the opportunity, I had a great ability to screw it up. Got thrown out of the military for alcoholism at the age of 20. Landed a job in Charlotte, North Carolina, was named Salesman of the Year in the company, drunk. Fired the same year. An amazing ability to be a world beater, but that fatal quality of taking a drink at the wrong time. Had an opportunity to go through the University of Missouri Law School at absolutely no cost, but decided to take a little drinky poo instead. So I was just that kind of guy. I was one of those kind of chaotic people, never had any semblance of a pattern of behavior. So it was that real good, real bad. And my life was characterized by just a constant successions of success, and then hit the wall and failure. And starting over and failure, and starting over and failure. And what I didn't notice was that the trajectory was always downward. And very quickly, you know, my alcoholism was compact compared to many cases sitting in this room. My serious drinking lasted a total of 8 years. from 16 to 24. I started serious drinking at 16, had what I hope and pray was my last drink 8 years later when I was 24. And in the course of that, absolutely devastated my own life, did a major amount of damage to a number of other people, and did some things that defy even reconciliation. Never mind it. But it was just a crash downhill. I wound up, I don't know why there was no logic to much that I did, but when I was out wandering around, I wound up over in the city of Flint, Michigan, and it's a wonderful place. It's a lot like La Jolla. If you believe that, I guarantee you've never been. It's a little more like Warsaw right after World War II. God awful place. What on earth I went there for, I'll never know. Flint was elected the worst city in the United States in which to live a few years back. And you know, it's funny what you'll do for a little bit of just sense of accomplishment. When that made the list as the worst city, I felt a little pride about that. I thought, geez, at least I did that. You know, I helped put them on the list. And that's where I crashed and burned. I worked in General Motors till my reputation got in front of me, and then I wound up unemployed, darn near unemployable. And even though I was a real character, you know, I had come from a family that was a decent family. We were not wealthy or anything like that, but they were good people. And I was raised to the amount that I would let them. I was reared in a family where I should have learned some values and some qualities and things. And in a little old town, looked like Mayberry. We didn't even know what a town drunk looked like. We had one guy that qualified, but everybody just kind of loved him. And street crime didn't exist. And 8 years after I left, I wound up living on the streets of Flint, Michigan. I wasn't a gangster or anything like that. I was an alcoholic who went pretty low in the food chain, and I survived the way folks survive when they go to the bottom of the food chain and move into a world that defies any connection to the real world around it. You know, it's a strange thing when I got to that point in my life, when I looked out at the world, it was as if I was looking through a curtain or something. The world looked abnormal to me. What at one time would have been unthinkable was the only normal thing that I felt, and it became a real way of life for me. And so that just happened, and I made my way by hustling, conniving, cheating folks, letting good-hearted people waste their efforts on me, rolling other drunks. I mean, I wasn't reared to do that kind of junk, but that's what happened. If I wasn't rolling them, they were rolling me. I mean, we didn't get tourists much, but we just each other. You know, whoever was. Well, whatever. Sold my blood, $5 a throw. You really reach the pinnacle when you start doing that. I'd have let them suck me dry if they hadn't had controls on that sort of thing. And so I was gone. I'm talking about a guy in his early 20s. And that's what my life had become. You know, that some of us are basket cases and we just drag along the bottom and it just gets worse in quality. And so that's what I was. I was had a fairly morbid kind of outlook for myself. I never thought I would make 30, and I think that would have been an accurate forecast had things not happened like they did. And I was one of those. I was bad enough as it was, but I was one of those people. Like I know that many people in this room, probably most people in this room, have had morbid fears about doing some irreparable damage to somebody else. And thank God, for most of us, those great fears are nothing but bad dreams. And those panicky times when you wake up and you frantically try to put together what happened the night before, it's always nearly always, that sigh of relief, we dodged a bullet again. But it's not always that way. Sometimes the bad dreams become real nightmares, and I was one of those. I came to one morning there in Flint in jail. That was no novelty there. That was a very common occurrence. And I assumed I was in there for the same as always, just street behavior of some sort. And after I was awake a while, the jailer came by, a guy I knew very well. And I said, hey, when can I get out? And he would normally say 10 o'clock. That was a drunk getting out time. And he said, I hope never, and walked off. And I had not a clue what he was talking about. And then some of the other guys, I guess they'd read newspapers or something, some of the other guys in there told me that the night before I'd gotten hold of somebody's car and was driving blind drunk, blacked out down the main street of the city and ran down and killed 2 people. And my response, my reaction was, you can't imagine that. But it's unthinkable, an unthinkable thing. I knew I was capable of anything, but I could not handle the information that I'd done something like that. And I was not a callous person. I was not somebody insensitive to human life. And my response, well, I just pushed it away and said, no, it couldn't be. And then gradually accepted truth. The only time I'd ever been in jail, I didn't try to get out. I didn't want out. I was afraid to get out. I was ashamed to get out. I was ashamed to be breathing when 2 fine young folks no longer were because of me. And I don't care how demented I might have been. You don't balance the scales with that kind of value. You know, why is a guy like me breathing? And so I was just so deeply, deeply ashamed to be. I didn't want out of there. And somebody, one of the policemen there, learned that I had family. I guess that I had family in North Carolina, and took it on himself to call my folks and tell them that they had a guy up there in a lot of trouble. And so my mother and sister came. And I didn't want them to come. I didn't want them to go into that. I just wanted to go away. And so they came and I got an attorney, negotiated my release on bond. I was charged with manslaughter. And I didn't know how to tell them that I was afraid to get out, ashamed to get out. I didn't know how to say that. And so I was released. I stayed in there 17 days, was charged with manslaughter, and then was released on bond. Now, I didn't do any real heavy consideration about it. I knew without any deliberation about it that I would never take another drink as long as I lived. I mean, how could you? How could you possibly drink after something like that? Any rational person will tell you if it gets bad enough, you'll quit. Well, don't believe that if you're talking about alcoholism. Now, I didn't have a clue about alcoholism. I had a lot of people tell me that's what I was, but I didn't believe that. And I had not a clue. I thought it would be physically impossible for me to pick up a drink. The guilt was too great. And I got out and I stayed sober a day and a half. I stayed sober by walking the streets. I couldn't face anybody. I couldn't talk to anybody. Couldn't look anybody in the eye. And the next day I started to drink, of course. And from July to November of 56, I drank literally like nobody I've ever seen. Now, I've worked with thousands and thousands of alcoholics. I held an alcoholic in my arms while he died, way back before we had treatment or medical intervention or anything like we were talking about. Held that guy, and even as he died, he was still protesting. And I got to the point that I just gave in. You know, there's a place, I won't go into detail about this, but there is a place in alcoholism where most of us do not go. There's a dimension beyond, way beyond, where most of us go. And once we go past that dimension, it's remarkably rare that we ever come back. I'll tell you a way to test that. If you run into somebody, you'll probably see it around some of the cities here. People who come back from that, you can meet them, and I don't care if they're dressed in a tuxedo. You can talk to them 2 minutes, and the hair will stand up on the back of your neck. Because you'll intuitively know that you're talking to somebody that has come back from the dead. And I know as a 24-year-old guy that I came perilously close to that. They call it pathological drinking. I was trying to drink myself to death. That was obvious. A wino could have diagnosed me. And then the 19th of November of 56, just about that much in a bottle of gin that I finished and went off to court. And I knew when I went to court that it was a one-way trip, that I wouldn't be back. I had no defense. And one of the hellish things of blackouts is I couldn't testify at my own trial. I'm not even a witness to my own behavior. And so I had to listen to it much as the jury listened to it. And it was clear to me that there was absolutely no question. And so I just was absolutely convinced, satisfied that I had done that. And so I was found guilty, of course, and sentenced that day to a max of 15 years in the Michigan State Penitentiary. Now, you gathered I was not a hothouse flower. I was not some young fraternity guy on the way to a party who had a tragic accident. I'm a loser. I'm a runaway train. I'm a disaster waiting to happen. So it wasn't a fluky kind of a thing. This was a product that was inevitable in a life like mine. And I remember that day. I remember when that sentence was passed, I had an instinctive reaction of fear. I guess a very normal thing, because an overnight drunk tank or a stockade in the military is not quite the same as where I knew I would be going. I would be going to a place called Jackson. It's a maximum custody penitentiary for the state of Michigan. And I'd never been there, but I knew some guys that were in and out of that place. So I knew it was not Disneyland. And so I had an instinctive, very human reaction of fear, but at the same time the most real sense of relief I'd ever known, because I knew it was over. It was over. And next day walked into that place. Walk is a little bit a little bit of a euphemistic term for what I went in on a chain. Kind of an angle. How can I get hold of something? I was past that and just gave up and snapped back into isolation like I've never known and nor dealt with. Put me in a cell. I sat there for the first month, never spoke to a human unless they asked me a direct question. And one day, it's amazing what turns around a life like that. I want to try to tell you, I've spent more time in that than I wanted to, but I know we've been here a long time, but be patient. Let me. I'm going to try to get us in jail and out, and then anyway, let me just go ahead and tell you what happened, because it's amazing to me about what a difficult illness this is we deal with, and believe me, I know how difficult it is. And mine was a case that was aggravated by circumstances that don't make it better, they make it worse. And when I look at that, my notion was that I would truly never live to get out of their life. And I believed that. I absolutely believed that and had no real conflict about it. All I wanted to do was disappear. And that's who I was, sitting in a cell. One day, the turning point started to come. And I wasn't looking for anybody. I wasn't looking. I didn't even think about stuff like that. One day I got a no, somebody knocked on my door, I guess you could call it. And told me I had to go see somebody. I went to see a fellow named Martin. He just graduated from one of the Michigan universities and had gotten a job there as a social worker. I don't think he liked it much. He didn't stay very long. But I'm glad. Maybe somebody else would have done the same thing. But that guy called me out for a standard social worker interview. Family history, social history. He went through all that stuff. And when he got through, he made the same diagnosis that I'd heard from everybody who ever talked to me. I've never had but one in my life. My God, you drink a lot, or you're a drunk, or you're an alcoholic. I'd heard that over and over. And so he made the same kind of exclamation that you sure had a lot of problem with booze. And then he added something I'd never heard before. Now, this was a long time ago. It seems like ancient history in some ways. And back then, there was not much going in the way of social networks to capture people like me. Yeah, there weren't places where folks would get you and send you in for EAP or referrals or capturing or whatever. I mean, guys like me, most anybody I knew, just sort of went till some major miracle almost caused them to make a move toward AA or just blind luck. But there were no systems to do it. And so this guy did what a lot of people have done when he got through that thing. He said, you've sure had a lot of trouble. But he added, we have an AA group here at the institution, and I think you ought to go. And that was exactly the way he put it. It wasn't an order. It wasn't one of those sort of things where they mandate you for life. It was nothing. No consequences if you don't go. He just flat said, yeah, we got a group, you ought to go. And then he sent me a little old note on a little piece of paper about like that. It said, you can go to your first meeting February 2nd of 57. Now, I'd never heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. Never heard. I'd never heard anybody helping a drunk. I didn't believe I was an alcoholic. I didn't want to stop drinking. I felt so guilty that I was ashamed to even think of any thoughts of decency or hope. I was a dead man walking. And I went that meeting, February 2nd of 57. Not because I wanted to join AA. I think the only reason I went, I don't know, I think there's a state of defeat that produces the behavior that I was so beaten that I couldn't even muster resistance. You know what I mean? And so I just responded like a wind-up toy. You ought to go over there. So I went to that meeting and sat down and listened to my first meeting of AA. It was a remarkable experience. There was one person. They had a group of 300, and one guy spoke to me. They had an officer on the door. I walked up. He read my name on the shirt, Ivester, and yes, sir. And he said, "Sit down." So I went in and sat down and listened to my first meeting. Somewhat similar to ours, a little bit similar. Didn't have quite as much stuff as we did. The committees were shorter, and but the readings was the same, absolutely the same stuff. They prayed. I knew they were going to do that. I didn't know what AA was, but I figured there was going to be a little harp music in the background somewhere. And I was far from ready for that kind of stuff. So as soon as they said that prayer, I said, "Yeah, I knew it. Oral will be here in just a minute." And then they went through the opening. And you know, if you ever go to church again, or when you go next time, watch how they open a church service, and then watch how we open a meeting. And while the language might be a little different, it's remarkably similar. And if you're somebody that hadn't even thought of anything spiritual for a long time, it is frighteningly similar. And so I went through it, and then they introduced the speaker. And they gave us a speaker meeting that day. We had speaker one week and the discussion next. And the speaker was a guy named Shy Walker. And he told his story. And I'd never heard an alcoholic tell his story. I'd heard them tell stories, but not their own. You know. And that guy told a story. And I swear to you, I could not have been more shocked if he had a bit of chicken's head off. I mean, it made no sense. Why on earth would he be telling that to 300 hairy-legged convicts in here? It made no sense. And I wouldn't have told anybody that. I mean, my God, that was an awful story. An awful story. And I didn't identify with anything he said. He could have burped and I wouldn't have identified. I mean, nothing. And different from me as anybody I've ever met. And I left certainly more confused than I went in. And the amazing thing was I was back the next week. And thank God I didn't have to explain to anybody why I was back, because I didn't know. I just found myself back there. And I'll tell you something. Polly was talking about the power of attraction, the program of attraction. And she was 100% right. We are the program of attraction. It's not a banner. It's it's the energy we give off. It's the attractiveness that we convey. And what brought me back to my second meeting was that magical spirit that was this guy's life. He was truly, I think, at that point, the most enthusiastic person I had ever seen in my life. He made Dale Carnegie look like he was on Thorazine. That boy was wound up. And just on fire with this business. And I know that while I didn't identify with anything about it, didn't believe I was an alcoholic, knew that I was totally unworthy of breathing, much less some lofty thing called sobriety or serenity, any of that stuff, found myself back. And it was like a magnet, somewhere, even though I couldn't recognize it, that connected, that spirit that's so important, clicked. And I was not even aware of what had happened. You know, my earnest belief is that the message that we carry to a new person coming into Alcoholics Anonymous is exactly that. You know, when somebody comes in, I don't give them a book. I don't give them a lecture. I don't give them a tongue lashing. What I give them is a hand. What I give them is a welcome. What I give them is a sense of their value, their worth as a human being. What I give them is something to do that'll make them feel like they're part of the team and not some yo-yo that just wandered in. The spirit of this thing is what it's about. And that's exactly what that was. I came back. I could not figure out what was going on. I didn't believe I was an alcoholic. I was too young. I'm 24 years old. And back then, I will assure you that 24-year-olds were a rarity in Alcoholics Anonymous. I never met one. For the first several years that I was in AA, I was the youngest member in my entire state. And that's a wonderful feeling now. But I'll guarantee you it sucks at the time. When you're sitting in there, we talk about identify, don't compare all you want to, but when the guy sitting beside you outweighs you by 25 years of drinking, you're going to compare. And you're going to come out short. And there are all too many of those real well-intended folks. How old are you, boy? Well, 24, sir. And you going to quit drinking? I said, well, I was thinking about it. Oh, man, you ain't, good God. I was just getting started at 24. Yeah. Or spill more than you drank. Oh, God. Yucko. Or the thing that was the kind of, I love people like this, but the kind of patronizing folks that say, how old are you? And then say, my, aren't you lucky? Yeah, what a run of luck, eh? What a run of luck. Jeez. Well, it's a rocky place, rocky place. And for young people in Alcoholics Anonymous, I don't know if others adapt well. I know that there's young means something different than 24 today, but I still think that's just the most tricky ground in the world of trying to get into seeing that there's life after recovery. Because, man, I tell you, when I thought about those early days in this program, I had two sort of competing things in my head. One, I'd hear something and I'd get some hopeful thoughts of, geez, you suppose that could work for a guy like me? And then on the other side, I'd say, my God, what if it does? What if it does? I'm going to be bone dry for 50 years. What a thought. I'll never smile again. I thought, well, I looked at life, it was like looking through a long gray tunnel. I could not imagine what sober people did. They always look so bored and in pain. I never wanted to be sober. If people tell me about the bliss of being sober, it's like joggers telling me how much they love to jog. Next time you will see somebody jogging, look them in the face. Now, you tell me about the bliss of jogging. Well, I mean, I was just there, and so I kept going back. I've always been a decent listener. I was always a reader, drunk or sober. I tried to read drunk. I was always a reader. I read everything we had. Didn't have much back then, but I read all that stuff. I took an awful lot of, I'm any real purist, I took an awful lot of speed. I was not an addict. I was hungry. I was really wanted life to go on. I didn't want to take time out. And so I took enough speed to launch a rocket ship. I guarantee you that. And that stuff will speed you up. It'll screw up your wiring bad. And I could read the big book in 30 minutes almost. So I read a lot. And so I was just there. But stuff was going on. I started to feel some things, and there were some things that really constituted turning points. One, that guy that sent me, that Shy who spoke at that, thank God I didn't get some old bleeding deacon that just was nothing but crust and cynicism and talking down to everybody. Thank God I got somebody that was alive and well and vibrant and dynamic and conveyed in no uncertain terms that there's life after sobriety. Thank God for that man. And then a whole raft of people that came into that place meant an awful lot to me. Those constituted people who contributed to the turning point. The group that I belong to. I'm a very strong group person. I'll just tell you that because you'd figure it out pretty quick anyway. I am a strong group person. I'm not a chat room guy. I'm not somebody for lightweight stuff. I'm somebody who believes that alcoholism is a formidable illness. I'm somebody who believes that every meeting is important. I don't believe there's any such thing as an unimportant meeting. I don't think there's a meeting where I can afford to think less than somebody's life may depend on it, because it very well might. I'm a guy who believes in groups that have a real solution orientation. I don't like loosey-goosey stuff that's thrown together as an afterthought kind of stuff. I just don't like it. And I'm biased that way because of how significant that was to me. When I was blessed in the maximum custody penitentiary, but it had as fine an AA group in there as I've ever seen. Anywhere. Thank God. Anything less would have not been enough, I don't imagine, for a guy like me. But I was introduced to this design for living by other guys in the joint, just like me, who took the time to pull new guys aside and say, okay, guys, here's what it is, and go through the steps and lay out exactly what the design for living means. Thank God for that. The first place I ever learned to trust in my life, oddly enough, was in an AA group in a maximum custody penitentiary. I was the kind of guy who didn't believe anything from anybody, and the more righteous, the less I believed it. First place I ever trusted men was in that maximum custody penitentiary, where I watched folks do exactly what they said they would do. 100%. Where I watched men who, by their own description, had committed acts that defied imagination in their cruelty. And watch those self-same people perform acts of courtesy and consideration and love like I'd never seen. First place I ever trusted in my life, ever. First place I ever really had a connection to a power greater than myself, I'd spent my whole life in battle. I point to Brian because he works there. His boss is a good friend of mine now. But it wasn't always the case. I'd spent my whole life in turmoil and war about anything religious. It looked to me like anybody who was talking about spiritual stuff did it from a platform, talking down to me. And I could never connect. The gap was too wide. And all I ever felt was guilt and distance, and that's an impossible trip you're talking about. The first place where I ever saw God in action in terms that I could understand was among those same people. There was a spirit that I felt in that room that I couldn't define, didn't have to define, but that I couldn't deny. That was bigger than any of us and bigger than all of us. And while I couldn't define that spirit, I could believe. It's always, I won't get into step, but it's always interesting to me when we talk about the second step. About 90+% of the meetings I've ever sat in about second step is about believing in a power. It's not what the step says. It says came to believe that a power. Whole different notion. It's the difference between a concept you're trying to form and an action. And believing that puts that faith, that spirit, into action. And that's what happened. The first power that I ever prayed to was that power that I felt in that room. And I'll let you in on a little secret. I don't pray to a power much different today. I long since quit trying to get God to perform magic tricks or to fit in an 8x10 frame so that I could picture it. And finally heard what I'd been told all my life: if you want to find God, look within. And then connect that power to the power that flows. And amazing things happen. And that's how simply that was born. And that's why I'm so value a group where it's not chaos and confusion and profanity every other word. I want a place where the solution is alive and well and functional. And so, I got to rush because we got to dance. I'll tell you one last turning point in there, and then we'll get out of there. I don't ever like to talk about it without talking about it, though, but because I believe that recovery from alcoholism is exactly like it says in Doc's opinion, that frothy emotional appeal won't touch it. And what it says is that we have to have a solution that has depth and weight. Fellowship won't do it. Strong groups won't do it. Good sponsorship won't do it. There comes a time when old gospel hymn said you got to walk that lonesome valley. You got to go there by yourself. There ain't nobody here going to go there with you. And that's what it comes down to. We deal with a tough foe, and we won't always have the loving environment and support that we need. And there'll come a time where I've got to have a solution that has depth and weight. And where that came for me, where it started to be born, I did one day by pure accident almost. The guy spent the entire meeting on the fourth step. When he got through, I went back to my cell. I was somewhat acquainted with it. I'd read it very quickly, but I'd read it. And so I said, I'm going to do that thing. I sat down. I was going to write a little story about how such a nice guy as me got in such a mess. It is really what I meant to do. I didn't mean to do an inventory. That was what I would have called an inventory, I guess. But I was going to explain that, and it certainly would have been somebody else's fault. And so I sat down and started to write. I had my starting point. Now, this is literally the way it happened. I was ready. I wrote 2 lines, and then it was as if I hit a wall. All at once, the charade was over. All at once, the life of delusion and illusion that had been my life came into sharp focus. And I didn't think about it. But I believe what happened was that I just saw that sometimes you call it a moment of clarity. And I just came to that point where I saw the futility of my own life. And in one motion, no hesitation, no regrouping, in one motion, I opened up and just started to pour out my life. That's all. Just a tortured young guy pouring out his life. My hand flew, trying to keep up with the race of things coming out. And when I got through, I had 3 pages of hopeless scribble. Nobody could have read it. Nobody's supposed to. That was my inventory. And I'll tell you something. Almost 47 years, I have done 2 3/4 of inventories. My second inventory was more thoughtful, more analytical, using the columns, so forth. My third one was basically situational, and I did a little more than a 10-step inventory, did a 5th step with a guy about that. But I'm not an analysis paralysis guy. You hurry up and believe that. I'll tell you this, though. That first inventory was more valuable than the other 2 combined. You cannot screw up an inventory if you honestly pour out your heart. You got the rest of your life to work on it. But getting that truth out, unloading and getting that stuff out was the most important work I've ever done in my life, bar none. When I got through with that inventory, I knew at the depth of my being, I knew that I was alcoholic. No question about it whatsoever. Not the young guy, not the whiz kid, not the tragic case. I knew I was alcoholic. I knew I was beat. Fought a good fight, but it was over, fellow alcoholics. It was over. And it hasn't returned. That day I was beat. And the issue was not that I decided not to drink. The issue was I accepted at the depth of my soul that I can't drink. I'm a guy who simply can't drink without self-destruction. That's called surrender. Surrender. Complete and absolute surrender. And all these many years later, I can tell you without any hesitation, I have never revisited that a single time. Not once. I have never questioned that. I've come close to drinking. I have the mind of an alcoholic. I am an alcoholic. What other kind would I have? And mine is the kind of mind that can and has and may again turn irresistibly to the thought of a drink. The only thing that prevents that happening is the condition of my spiritual program. And all I got to do is let that thing deteriorate or dwindle or get down and look out. Look out. That's alcoholism. And I knew that day. That was an important day for me. That day I became a solid member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I've never gone to a meeting since the same man. I've never been the lost face in the crowd again. I'm a purposeful guy. I know what I'm doing in every meeting I attend, including this one. No question about it. Man on a mission. And so, went at it. Amazing stuff happened. I'll head for the home stretch in a rush and hurry. We won't get there immediately, but we'll be pretty close. What happens from there is not magic, but it's an absolute result of the program of recovery that's laid out in the steps. To put it in real simple terms, in terms that I like a lot, it's in that little line in the preface to the 12 and 12, which says it more succinctly and powerfully than I ever could, where it describes our steps as a set of principles, spiritual in their nature, which, if practiced as a way of life, not worked or studied or seminared or written about, if practiced as a way of life, the means by which I live, two amazing things will happen. It's more than two, but it's only two entries. One, the obsession to drink will be expelled.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think.
That's a fact. Now, it won't be expelled far. Brian's sitting on mine over there right now. Yeah. So it's expelled. That sucker's gone. It hadn't been here for a long time, but I know where it is. But that'll happen. I don't have to do anything. Don't have to practice yoga or nothing. It'll just absolutely, as I practice this thing, it'll go. And then it says something that sounds it sounds almost like a poetic kind of angelic phrase or something. It says, will enable the sufferer, that's me, to become happily and usefully whole. Oh, man. Oh, man. Talk about frothy emotional appeal. That is as real as a heart attack. That little simple thing became a fact of life for me in a maximum custody penitentiary. There is nothing, absolutely nothing that Alcoholics Anonymous offers that wasn't given to me when I was locked up like a wild animal in a zoo. It enabled me to become happily and usefully whole. Became a free man in a maximum custody penitentiary. The first day of pure, unadulterated joy I ever had in my life was in a maximum custody penitentiary. The first time when real worth and self-esteem started to be just characteristics was in a maximum custody penitentiary. The power of this program is not limited, nor is it barred from places like that. Seemed like the tougher the deal, the tougher the program, and I got exactly what I needed. And I was able to leave that place psychologically and physically in good shape, spiritually in the best shape I'd ever been in my life, with a brand new way to live. And when I hit the street, it was just like any guy, I guess, coming out. I had little dreams. They were small ones, I'll guarantee you that. I wanted to be free for sure, just physically free. I wanted to be able to earn a living. I wanted to be able to have a friend. I really wondered if I would ever have one person that would trust me for real. So I had just little dreams, that maybe I'd get those things done. I wanted to be a citizen. For the first time in my life, I'd never been a citizen. I brought down property values. I didn't add anything to a community. I never voted. didn't pay taxes. I'm just a leech, doing. So I wanted to be a citizen. And so when I hit the street, I had a job, lousy job. Went to work, never missed a day's work, never was absent, never was late. Worked at 10 at night till 6 in the morning, sweeping the floor in a mill. And I was so grateful for that job, man. I was dangerous. I'd be just running with that thing, and people would look out. Here he comes, and I was grateful. Boy, I'm telling you, immediately active the first day I was out. The second week I was out, somebody asked me to go over to prison with them. And I said, man, they're not going to let me in that prison, or worse, they may not let me out. And I said, come on, it's all right. And so I went 2 weeks out, and I'm over going back in. Now, I don't recommend this, but I did it. These were sort of pioneer days, and we do things a little more refined now than we did then, but that's where I went. 2 months after I was out, I was named outside sponsor of that place. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine? 2 months earlier, I'm locked up in a maximum custody penitentiary. 2 months after release, and I'm a trusted servant entrusted with carrying a significant program into a correctional facility. Can you believe that? It's unbelievable. About the same time, my parole supervisor came to me one day and said, Tom, you're real active in this AA thing, and it concerned me because I thought he was going to tell me to slow down. I knew I wouldn't. And he said, wouldn't it help you if you could drive? And I said, yes, sir, but I can't, like he didn't know. And when I'd left Michigan, he'd had letters, this big man, never drink alcoholic beverages, man, never drive a motor vehicle, for obvious reasons. And I accepted that as a fact of life. He said, well, let me check it out. A little later, he called me and asked me to meet him at the Sears store uptown. This sounded like Andy Griffith, but the Sears store is where the license agency was, and my sister drove me up. Absolutely way happened. She pulled up in front of the store, could see my guy all the way at the back of the Sears store. It was just one of those long shotgun stores. And he's talking to a guy, and I walked up to him, he introduced me to the fellow. We talked for a while. Never talked about driving. We just talked about hunting dogs and fishing and, all that good redneck stuff. And we got through. We just decided to quit, I guess. And the guy handed me a driver's license. Didn't even ask me if I could drive. And there was no test of any kind whatsoever. Road, written, verbal, nothing. Good old boy. Didn't even pay for it. Now, I've had people ask me, say, man, you must have been well connected politically. Yeah, you bet. Yeah, the sheriff and I were intimates. You can be sure of that. The parole supervisor paid the $4. That's all it cost back then. And I tell you what I really believe that is. I'm somebody who believes, Polly heard me say this 1,000 times, but I believe it. I'm a great practitioner of the way it says in the book that it's okay to have your head in the clouds, but keep those big feet on the ground. And that's what I like. Old Sam Shoemaker called what we do shirt sleeves Christianity. It's the working thing. It's spirituality with combat boots on it. I like it to be real in my life and not a theory. And I tell you what I believe. I believe in miracles. I've had God, believe in them. I don't believe them. I know. I've had miracles in my life that defy imagination. That was one of them. And my belief about miracles is I don't like to take the wonder out of it, but I don't like to mystify it too much. I believe that miracles are what happens when preparation meets opportunity and God does the introduction. And when that happens, the walls come down. And I don't care what they are. The walls come down. Powerful stuff. Powerful. That's what happened that day. That's what happened. And, I probably not even legal, but I've been driving ever since. And 5 months after I was out, I was elected DCM. I finished 2 years at Michigan State while I was locked up. And I never had learned to spell DCM at Michigan State. They didn't teach that. But I wasn't running. I didn't realize that's the best way to get elected. But I was elected DCM. And the same guy who wondered if he'd ever be trusted by anybody or would have one friend. And here I'm asked to be the trusted servant for AA in 12 cities in my state. Tremendous thing. 2 years after I was out, I was sitting in my house one day minding my own business. I got a phone call from the state capitol. And it was a guy that I'd met one time. He visited the AA group that I sponsored at that prison. And so he asked for Mr. Ivester, and I got on the phone, introduced himself, and I said, yes, sir, I remember you. And he said, Mr. Ivester, we're expanding the rehabilitation program in our system. They were just starting it. And said, we're expanding that, and we were wondering if you would consider accepting a position in that. Now, I've just been out, not quite 2 years. Now, here it is. That's not headline news today. The day of that phone call, there had never in the history of the world been an ex-con hired in anything like that. And I knew that. And I knew they weren't going to start with me. And so I said to him, do you know who you're talking to? And he said, yeah, we've checked you out. And I said, right off the bat, I said, intellectually, I said, geez, I'd rather do that than anything I could imagine. To myself, I said, ain't no way. But when God's got work for us to do, the walls come down. I don't care what the walls are. And I was employed. And 1961, and went to work as a rehabilitation officer, and I had a marvelous career. Now, I was not a professional ex-convict. Some of us were talking at breakfast the other morning. There's no market for ex-convicts. There's no market for people with criminal justice background, criminal history background. There's no market for that. But there's a real market for people who have had a profound change and have developed some abilities to do something. Amazing, amazing opportunities. And so when I went to work, I decided I had to make a decision. I couldn't talk to anybody. I'm the only guy on the planet with this experience. And so I had to find my way. You talk about AA traditions having value. That was my guideline for how to differentiate between a professional and somebody with this kind of troubling history that was ever present. And so I decided right away, if I'm going to take a paycheck, I'm going to be a pro. And I'm going to be the man. Whether I want to be, I'm going to be the man. I can be the best man that you've ever seen, but I'm the man. And bottom line, if something goes down, don't worry about where I stand, because you'll find out real quick, real quick. So I had to do that. If I'm going to take my place, I compete as a professional and not as some hoodlum hero type of deal. And so I took my place. I put in 39 years in that system, and I swear to God, I never was sure whether people knew about me or not. It was never discussed with me from day one. Not one single time. We think about California being a trendsetter state, and it is. Good news and the bad news. It is a trendsetter state. But so is North Carolina, because we had a governor there who was courageous enough to take that step and never ballyhoo. I mean, he might have been afraid to. I don't know. But that was an unbelievable gesture for somebody to make. And so I went to work. An amazing thing happens when you love the opportunity you have to do a job and you do good work. There's a hunger for leadership. And so I started getting kicked up a little bit into supervision, then management, and then one day the head of our system asked me to come by. He said he had a little task for me, and that normally meant he wanted me to pinch hit for him somewhere making a speech. And I said, okay, boss, whatever. Went by. He said, Tom, I'd like for you to take over an institution as warden. And even though I was in the system, that is still shocking news, you know. And it's one thing to be in rehabilitation, it's another to be the man. And I'm in charge of the oozy and the woozy, and good God. And I said, God, boss, I don't want to do that, man. I don't want to be the turnkey. And tell me what you got in mind. He told me what he had in mind. I said, will you let me think about it? He said, oh, sure, take 5 minutes. And I took the 5 minutes, went out, prayed hard as a dog. Came back and said, I'll do it. And then for the next 20 years, that's what I did, was run institutions. I took it because I really figured that with some power and influence, I might be able to do some things that needed done, and that was certainly the case. I had a marvelous career because I was just bold enough and reckless enough that I was willing to go places where more conventional people wouldn't go. And so we were able to do some things in our state that I'm extremely, extremely proud of. It's a legacy that means a lot. And so that was, obviously a great career. And I left it at 39 years. I learned I was the oldest guy in the system. I never intended to be that. I also had been eligible for retirement for 10 years, and I learned that I would make as much money retired as I did working. So, God, even for me, that was a no-brainer. And so I was retired in an outlandish fashion. The day I retired, the next day, I had already been elected to be the chairman of what you guys call H&I. We call Correctional Facilities Committee work. And I was elected to be chairman for the state of North Carolina the day after I retired. And so my retirement lasted about a nanosecond. And my wife said, "Have you lost your mind?" And I said, "Probably." But I found my soul. And so I did that. I'll tell you what that boiled down to, and then I'm going to play ripples and flourishes, and we'll kiss and dance. What that boiled down to, and I don't want to put anything on anybody, but I hope you'll think about this. Because service in Alcoholics Anonymous is vital. God is vital. It's so vital and so impaired in many areas of the country, where active outreach programs don't even exist, where we go trying to make the way to Alcoholics Anonymous easier for people. So I'm heavily concerned about it. And when I left that system, I've been 39 years in a high-pressure job. Of course, a little trip to the Caribbean would have been nicer to go play. I'm a human. But when I walked out of there, those guys asked me to be a chair. I weighed the thing. Of course I weighed the thing. And then I thought, if there's anybody in this country that understands the dilemma of dealing with alcoholics in corrections, it's this guy here. My God, I did it daily for over 40 years. Never a day of my life that I didn't actively think of something in that guy. If there's anybody that understands that, it's this guy. And having put in a 39-year career, if there's anybody that understands the system and has access, it's this guy here. It's my belief that if I had been able to walk away from that, recognizing that need and my ability to do something about it, if I had been able to walk away for selfish considerations, I would have paid a price for that in my integrity, in my qualities as a member, as my qualities as a leader in this program. I would have paid a price for that. So I did it. And I've had a marvelous time, and we've done some work in North Carolina that I feel real good about. So I'm an active guy. I didn't used to be. I'm as active as anybody I know. And I have been that way for as long as anybody I know. We're not racing. That's just the way it is. I'm somebody who's geared that way. I drank that way. And my recovery is that way. I'm not a low-gear guy. I'm not a sit-around and think about it guy. I'm an action guy. And I think what it comes down to, somebody asked a writer one time what he would do if he knew he only had 6 months to live. He said, "I would write faster." That's me. That's me. Man, I am 71 years old. I don't have much left. Jesus, I'm going to hang it up one of these days. Leave a rich widow. Somebody. And I got to hurry. I've got projects for the next 30 years in mind. So I got to pack in as much as I can. And that's why I said in the old timers meeting today that when I go out of here, I don't want to go out of here sitting around thinking about it and resting for what? I don't know. I want to go wide open. And when I go out, I want to drop in my tracks, and I want to be going wide open. I want to be in the business of what we're doing. I've got stuff going in my mind. I've never been more creative. I've never had my imagination more fired. I've never been more enthused about Alcoholics Anonymous than I am right now. And I feel good. If you're not on fire about this thing, if you're not absolutely burning with passion, for God's sakes, man, don't hang and wither. Jump in this dude. Think about the talents. Everybody in this room has talents to bring. And if you're not giving them, for God's sakes, do yourself a favor. And go for it and have a ball. Thank you.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs, long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down. And then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.